It's not official yet. The election hasn't actually been announced, but it does appear that it's going to be starting on Sunday. So I don't know if there's anywhere that your heart's at, Budrino, anywhere that you want to start the conversation out with some spicy takes. How are you feeling right now?
I think I feel a little bit nervous, like a lot of people,
Yeah.
um, in terms of just the possible outcomes. And the I think a lot of people are just really waiting for this election to get dropped for it to officially start, and so everyone can start preparing for mail-in ballots and all that kind of stuff, because people have been saying for quite some time it's coming soon, and I think a lot of people are anxious to just finally start. I saw someone say today that I think it's -2 campaign day, like campaign day -2. We're 2 days away from when the campaign starts. So
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because everything's always framed around like what is it, um, like E-Day, and it's just
yeah,
like as we get into it, it's nice to have that clarity and people can kind of start like moving their troops around, getting ready for it. Have you
yeah,
seen or
definitely.
heard much in terms of like movement on the ground from those that you worked with in the past?
Uh, I've seen like I think a lot of people are preparing to different degrees at this point. I know some like MPs were somewhat like they had to start preparing and get campaign offices, but I know some people are kind of nervous about doing that because you can't, if there is an election that if it doesn't get called, then you're kind of just out of 3 grand or whatever for a campaign office for a month
Yeah.
that you're not going to use. But from insiders I know in the Liberal Party, from people in the media, I mean, it definitely seems to be going down. So I feel like a lot of people are preparing in different ways. The Conservatives seem to be just lighting themselves on fire at every
Yeah.
opportunity they can. And it's interesting with the Conservatives. I don't think I've really even seen many like Conservative MPs talk about Aaron O'Toole. They're all
Mm.
kind of doing their own thing. There definitely seems to be something up. Um, Something's weird there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the video, I won't stream it right now, but the video that they launched today was absolutely hilarious. And then I think I've said too, like, I somewhat like it for a moment, and then I'll start hating it again. It's such like an oddity. Do you have a take on it?
I mean, it's such a boomer video because it's like the old Willy Wonka. So it's like I feel like my mom would
Yeah.
like remember that because like I remember the what was it, the Johnny Depp one, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just a very weird video. It was the way they edited it was so like you can tell they're kind of trying to appeal to that boomer base, but it they did it in a very odd way that like I think I saw the People's Party of Canada say the left can't
Yeah.
mean
Yeah.
in response, and it's like like I guess that's a good jab from them, but it's like it's also like yeah, they're basically like Nazis almost. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, from that perspective, the CPC seems left when
Yeah.
Maxime Bernier is your leader. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like I don't know, like I'm looking for like some good content from them because I feel like the right is so like I think you talked about before, that's so divided right now, and I really want to see what happens with how they try to push the right vote as O'Toole is like talking about labor and things like that, which traditionally makes his base like throw up in their mouths.
definitely, and I think he's really pissed off a lot of his base. I think just by being really incompetent.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think he's going to survive? Do you think he's going to hold on and pull off opposition, or is it possible the NDP, with their new focus on the wealth tax, which I love, might even swing into opposition territory? That will never happen, because I think you were saying too, like the base that the Conservatives are going to always draw on is like 30%, and that 30% isn't really going to sway. So I don't think that's enough for the NDP to do anything.
Yeah, like I think from a theoretical standpoint, definitely the NDP has the largest possible voters. They have the largest people who consider voting NDP as a second party.
Mm.
So they definitely have hypothetically the highest ceiling to grow. But just with the way Canada's elections work and stuff like that, I just don't see the Conservatives dipping below 25. And the other
Mm.
problem with Canada's electoral system is it's always inherently been biased to the NDP. So even if the NDP wins 25% of the vote, it's less, they win those votes less efficiently than other parties do because the NDP kind of has that national support across the country. But it's not as concentrated. That's what helps the Conservatives. It's concentrated in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, rural Ontario. And with the Liberals, they have it concentrated in urban centers all across the country and Atlantic Canada, some of Quebec. And that's the problem with the NDP is it's not as concentrated in that sense. So I mean, I definitely think in that sense it could happen. Like in it's kind of like at the possible outcomes, it could happen at this point from where the margins of errors are. The NDP could, if the NDP like overperformed to the max window they could, the Conservatives underperformed, something like that could happen from the general vote percentage. But in terms of seats, it's so biased against the NDP. Yeah. Then again, though, I could see something with voter turnout. If something happens really weird with that, where it's really low or certain parts of the country are low, I could see that being something that people aren't necessarily accounting for right now.
Yeah, that like the vote efficiency is such an important thing, and I think that's one thing that you always dive into when you take a look at your riding by riding analysis. And like right now, like I just took a quick look at BC, and it's odd. Like I don't know. We've got like the Greens in play. They could just blow up spectacularly, and then that vote goes to the Liberals. The Conservatives could just like keep bleeding, and then the PPC could pick off their share. Like it really gets like interesting when you get into like the ridings themselves. Is there any stories that aren't being told when it comes to that vote share?
I think right now the biggest thing that I paid attention to this week was mail-in ballots because I think that's going to have such a large impact on ridings. Yeah. And I haven't really seen traditional media talk about it yet. I guess they're waiting for Elections Canada to make the announcement on Sunday. But that's the problem is the day of the election that it's announced is when you can request your mail-in ballot. So we should already kind of be knowing about these steps. And Elections Canada did put out something today about the steps. And I definitely see that, you know, there's a thing that when you're proving your identity, your only options are by fax, by mail, or but like you have to physically mail it, or you have to go to an Elections Canada office. So I can see that being a big problem in certain ridings in terms of voter turnout, because when we look at the by-election that happened, like with Annamie Paul, that Toronto one, that had really historic low voter turnout, and she kind of overperformed in a way, but that really did hurt her in a way. And I definitely think that that's the biggest narrative I see right now is that that kind of mail-in ballots that was such a big story with the states, it could definitely be a big story here.
Yeah. We have Dmitri joining us here, and I was going to ask some like kind of theory related questions, and Dmitri always does a good job kind of bringing that into like the analysis. So welcome, Dmitri. One of my favorite comments of all time in anything was after that interview we did together, Dmitri. Budrino left a comment every time I can't remember what it was, something every time something happens, Dmitri grows smaller. I died laughing at that. So it's nice to see you fully in the proper ratio, sir.
Yeah, I got my camera issues figured out. Good to be here.
So we were just taking having a quick conversation about like the things that were kind of key to us, and we just kind of talked about like the mail-in ballots and the importance there. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot lately is like when it comes to like getting involved with electoral politics, it's like I kind of feel gross about it. And I was looking at like what like some of the stuff that Lenin said about it, and one of the things that he had talked about was the thing that matters most is getting involved with like some type of immediacy to resolving the people's economic harms. And if you aren't directly addressing those items, you aren't really going to be getting the full effect from trying to use electoralism for good. And I don't know if there's anything you're tracking as the economic harms most in need of address, and if anybody's actually doing shit to help anybody.
Yeah, that's a good question because it can be kind of depressing because we know like none of our parties really have any serious agenda to change things radically in any way. And obviously, especially in terms of climate change, where you have IPCC report saying, you know, okay, we have 4 years to just phase out fossil fuels. Like, I don't really see how it happens, regardless of who gets in power. And I think the biggest problem too is that even if we had, let's say NDP had a perfect plan to phase out fossil fuels, like, and they committed to it, they can't guarantee to do anything large scale long term because they can't guarantee that they're going to stay in power long enough to do it. So from that perspective, it's like, right, like I think a lot of people realize that, and that's what depresses people from like really going out and participating, because it just feels like shuffling shit around at the end of the day. But at the same time, right, like if you get like conservatives in, for example, or even liberals as a majority, we just know things are going to get worse. And like my perspective on it takes so little effort to go and vote. I see no reason not to do it. Even though I see, right, that there is probably not really going to be any movement in the right direction from that, but it's a stopgap measure before we figure out if we can do something better. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, no, I think it takes me like literally like 2 minutes to vote, top. So it's so worth that minuscule time effort. Yeah, I totally agree.
And perhaps like, right, like maybe voting can be tied in the organization to go vote for NDP. Could be said like, right, not that, hey, let's go vote NDP and NDP will fix everything, but okay, let's vote NDP, but also start organizing outside electoral politics and start building that power, right? And use this kind of like as a gateway to funnel people towards more meaningful efforts. And I think that that's kind of like the difference, right, that happened, I think, during Bernie campaign, that all the focus was on just, they'll get Bernie elected and, you know, things are going to be great. Yeah. But there was really no, like, right, like, at least I didn't notice a lot of call for, like, really changing the system in any sort of revolutionary fashion. That, and I think that's what needs to happen. We need significant structural changes. Our system is not designed to cope with the problems we're seeing in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think it's really important to dive into those elements too, like the structural problems. But like just trying to keep it like light and focused on the election right now. Like with the liberal, with Biden's win, like they had to deal with the mail-in ballots that we were just talking about. Like, do we see the mail-in ballots kind of making a big dent and impact in the potential performance and outcome of this election that maybe is going to surprise people? And I guess that question's for budrino because you're the expert.
Hell yeah, brother. that's what I mean, Alex Jones is just screaming right now for sure.
Yeah.
I think after the results, like from what I've seen in Facebook groups, like afterwards when whatever result happens, I think for sure there'll be kind of like a push from conservatives. There will be like some form of protest and stuff like that. But in terms of the ballots, I'm trying to figure that out right now. Actually, I talked to Elections Canada. It doesn't seem like they're 100% sure because I've gotten conflicting answers on how easy it's going to be to vote. So I think if it's only by fax and by mail, you have to prove your identity. That's really hard for an average person to, like, especially someone like young like us, like fax machines, like just no one has them anymore.
Yeah.
70-year-olds don't even have fax machines. So
I thought you were a fax machine. That's my only.
I'm an anti-faxer. That's my stance on this.
Amen.
But like, if that's what it is, like the only way you can prove your identity is by fax or by mail or going in person, I think that's going to discourage a lot of people from voting. Ironically, I think that's going to hurt Trudeau because I think the conservative vote is the most reliable. They're the least, like, they're more likely to go vote in person. It won't be to the degree of the States, I think, because our Conservative Party does to some degree believe in COVID more than the Republican Party, quite substantially, actually, in terms of like who's going to get vaccinated and stuff. But I could actually see that hurting Trudeau if they don't figure this out. They didn't get their pandemic elections bill passed in time. So from what I see right now, like, I really think that this could possibly hurt Trudeau. I think I saw you, Matt, mention earlier this week, students. This will hurt students for sure, especially the timing of this election, because so many students I know don't really know, okay, am I living on campus? Am I living off of campus? There's so many things going on right now with the different universities and vaccines and requirements and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be really confusing for that group. And like you said on Twitter, I do think they kind of did that on purpose to screw over the NDP in a way, because that's the NDP's strongest thing that got going for them right now is that youth vote.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard because like you don't want to be cynical. You want to be like, okay, maybe they just did it because this is the best time. They said this is the best time, and that's all it was. But yeah, there are so many factors that go into it. It is so like Machiavellian. Yeah, I don't know. Do we see any other hijinks? Anything other fun or interesting that they're going to try to do to fuck with the election?
I mean, I haven't heard like in terms of like uh in BC, I think you guys did the election a little bit differently last time, right? So you could just request a mail-in ballot and it came to your house, I think, right?
Yeah. I to be clear, I
And
did not vote. I hate the BC NDP.
okay.
I'm done with
Oh
electoral
yeah,
in
for
BC
sure.
for sure. So don't ask me too hard questions about BC, please.
But yeah, I definitely understand that because Oregon's terrible. But like, it's interesting from that point because BC did get that pandemic elections changed beforehand, and it was easier to vote from what I'm seeing right now. Um, from what I've seen, they Elections Canada, I think they do have the authority to make it more convenient. Was the wording like make mail-in voting more convenient? But what does that mean? Because I've contacted Elections Canada and I haven't really gotten a distinct answer. To me, it seems like we're going to have to wait until the election's actually called to see if they modify how easy it will be to get a ballot. But I could for sure see that.
Is there anything you're thinking of, Dmitri?
Yeah, no, it's like good points that I definitely agree that I feel like right like the whole push for election really like at least my take on it is that liberals see conservatives as being big because Kenney and Ford basically shut the bed. And right like they were polling pretty low. Conservatives need to take Alberta and Ontario to stay relevant. I think liberals see this as an opportunity to kind of crush them, basically. And NDP has kind of been doing a bit better, but I don't think liberals see NDP as a threat. And they're going to do anything they can, right, to depress NDP vote as much as possible. But yeah, my impression is that most young people at this point are looking at NDP, especially with Greens having collapsed. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's a very cynical move on the part of liberals,
Yeah.
and it's probably going to work too.
Yeah,
That's a sad part.
that's the thing. Yeah, they've got such a good toolkit of things that work and things that work from like around the world. And that's one thing I kind of wish I paid more attention to is other tactics that they deployed down in the states, and then even other recent elections too, because they haven't been the only ones. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of fun stuff pop up. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything that we're cringing for? Anything that we know is coming that is just going to be the absolute worst? Like, I'm really looking forward to the debates. I'm really looking forward to just the fun that's cringe that's going to come out of that. I'm looking to the TikToks. Trudeau, like I think Budrino, you've talked about that quite a bit. He's going to have the worst TikToks of all time. I'm sure he's going to put his kids in there as like hostages, so you can't make fun of him because then you're gonna be making fun of his kids. I hope I didn't just give them any ideas, but I'm dreading that. Is there anything else we're hating?
Uh, I'm like I usually love attack ads. I find attack ads are usually my favorite. Like when I was a kid, when I was like 7 years old, I remember like the Kretchen attack ads, and like those were hilarious. How bad they were, but I think I'm not looking forward to like the some of the discourse. It's going to be really cringe. Like I'm just because the liberals, it's like I know they're going to attack the conservatives, but I think they will attack the NDP a bit more in the sense that the NDP is starting off so much stronger than they were last election. So I do think the liberals, it's going to be. I think I saw Charlie Angus respond to a former liberal voter who said he sat on his father's lap at the NDP convention and he changed his mind now. And
Jesus.
because he didn't like Charlie Angus being mean, Charlie Angus called Trudeau a dumbass or something, I think. And it whatever. But like
Yeah.
it's that kind of stuff that I think is just going to be so cringy. These like liberal voters are saying like there's genuine reasons to dislike the NDP, I think,
Yeah.
but it's like they never criticize Oregon, they never criticize the NDP for not being left enough. It's like Jagmeet Singh can be rude to Justin Trudeau and I can't vote for that reason, and that kind of stuff always irritates me a lot.
I feel like that tends to be kind of the liberal take, right? They're always like decorum And anytime, right, like anything like edgy comes out, they just jump onto it and just go. It's like, oh, it's so uncivilized. But it's like, as long as you do terrible things and you do it with decorum, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like similar thing in the States too with Biden, where like pretty much all his policy at this point is Trump policy. It's becoming indistinguishable, but he's doing it in a way that's acceptable to liberals, and we don't see anybody talk about it, right? Like kids in cages, what kids? Cages, well, that's a matter of opinion. They're, holding facilities for unaccompanied minors. And I feel, right, like you pretty much, as a liberal, you can get away with doing literally anything as long as you do it in a way that's presentable. And as long as you don't kind of like air your dirty laundry on screen. And I think that's what made Trump so horrific for kind of like American politics, is that he just said what they were doing. Like, he was very upfront about what was going on. And that's what really freaked people out, right? It wasn't what he was doing, it's how he was doing it.
Yeah. We have Bree Gardner joining us, future leader of the country formerly known as Canada. Bree, we're talking about like hot takes and things that are bothering us. Is there anything you want to get off your chest? I know you're super busy too, so I don't even know how long you're going to be with us.
Yeah, I don't know what was already said. Hi everyone. Hope y'all are enjoying Friday night. Yeah, I don't know what was already said, but I mean, I'm still just cheesed that like an election is happening now. I feel like for the past 2 years almost, we've been saying, when's it gonna be? When's it gonna be? And like right now at this juncture, with the incoming fourth wave, all of the provinces are reporting increasing case counts. I mean, the kids are going back to school. It seems like a lot of provinces don't have their back to school plans sorted out. Delta, the Delta variant is coming. It just seems like this is one of the worst junctures in our fight against COVID that we could possibly have a big federal election right now. It seems like a lot of Canadians agree. So that's what I'm cheesed about.
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to see that there is that agreement, because, yeah, I totally agree with that frustration. And it does seem to be consensus, which is nice and rare to see in this stupid country.
Yeah, I think so too. That just the timing is the worst, and it really, I think, highlights just how cynical this move is.
Yeah,
like there's clear disregard for public safety or health of Canadians, and it's just like, hey, we can win this election. Now is the time, right? Like whatever it takes.
Yeah,
and I mean, fundamentally, we would hope that politicians are working in our interests. But how is this in the interest of Canadians to do this right now?
Yeah.
Like, what benefit do we get as Canadians? And I think that's a question maybe that should be asked from liberals. Is right, like, how are they working in the interest of the country by doing this right now? Like, what are they hoping to achieve they're not going to be able to achieve with their minority and working with the NDP?
Yeah. Well, that's the most ridiculous part, is that, like, the Liberals are saying, minority governments don't last this long. The reason why minority governments don't last this long is because they aren't afforded the level of governability that the Liberals have been entrusted with by opposition parties like the NDP. And I mean, I don't like to use terms like gaslighting when it comes to politics, because I just think it's disrespectful. But I think it's very interesting that the party whose supporters are most likely to point fingers and say gaslighting, gaslighting, gaslighting is also the party that's saying that apparently we've gotten nothing done for the past 2 years. Apparently there's been gridlock. That's why we got a budget passed. That's why we had CERB. That's why we were able to pass bills that are not passing the Senate, not because of the NDP, but because of Justin Trudeau's actions. So that's the most ridiculous part of all, is that they haven't answered that question, Dmitri, but it's a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just the facts don't line up with what they say. And ultimately, it feels that liberals are just allergic to taking suggestions from other parties. If the idea doesn't come from them, they either reject it, or they come up with their own version of the idea that's watered down and less effective, like with CERB, where NDP wanted to have much more comprehensive protections. And then NDP rejected that and turned around and was like, hey, we have this plan. Yeah. So I think, like the gridlock comes from liberals. Like if they were willing to work with other parties, we wouldn't have a gridlock. It's not an inherent problem of a minority government. It's the way liberals behave.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly say, because I want to take every chance possible to shit on the BC NDP. They did the same thing, and I like how whenever I say anything about it, people are like, "Well, what about the BC NDP? Do you also have disdain for them for doing this?" 1,000% yes. Like, people are going to die because of this. It is just so cynical and disgusting and liberal, and just it sheds light on why they run the country, why they run for these positions, why they host the roles they do, and whose interests they ultimately serve. I just am so irritated by it, and then every time it happens, I get so mad at Trudeau and the whole liberal system, and then someone talks about the NDP, and then I get 15 times as mad because then I think about the NDP, and it's just exponential. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking now before I start screaming. I don't know, Budrino, do you have a take?
Well, I think we're a panel of different diverse analysts here. So, I think my position on this is that...
Are you a liberal? That was so diplomatic.
Well,
holy shit.
I think my position here is that the NDP is being obstructive and blocking every single liberal bill that went to Parliament. No, I'm just... it's so hard to do the liberal voice sometimes. I agree with all what you guys said there. It's really annoying how, especially from like the standpoint of the liberals arguing that the NDP is being obstructionist and that this is why they have to call this election. There's no reason for them to do this. They've passed pretty much every major piece of legislation they wanted. And when they did call a confidence vote, they stayed in power. So pretty much any piece of major legislation they wanted passed did get passed. It might have gotten reformed a little bit or changed a little bit, but pretty much everything they wanted to do while Parliament was in session, they got done. So that's why I'm so frustrated with this, with Trudeau using the Governor General, because I know some people don't want to call it undemocratic, but that's what I view it as, because the Governor General is essentially a representative of the Queen, and the fact that he's going to go to her house or whatever this weekend and ask for an election because he couldn't get one democratically, to me that's really frustrating and just very inconsiderate towards this fourth wave we're headed into.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess like we have so much certainty that there will be an election. Is it possible that she will decline his request?
No.
So
I don't see that happening.
And my understanding, like, I'm not an expert. Like, I almost have a poli-sci degree, but I'm not, and like, by no means am I like a doctor or anything. But my understanding is that even if the Governor General were to like decline his request, an election would happen anyway, just because it would end up like through some way or another, another party would likely be able to form government, and they wouldn't be able to form government, so it would end up dissolving Parliament regardless. So I think even if she did say no, which constitutionally she wouldn't do, it would still result in an election either way.
Okay.
The last time that happened was like almost 100 years ago with William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Mackenzie Bing affair. And like, back then it was a big issue. And if that were to happen again, if the Governor General were to say no, the country would explode. Like, every liberal would just literally melt and the country would fall apart. The amount of rage that would come from that, I just don't see it as a possibility.
So what I'm hearing...
40 checks. That could be how we get rid of the monarchy in Canada.
Yes. No, that's all I'm hearing. I think this just became like a heist, and we need to figure out a way to make this happen. We need to replace the Governor General and psych him out. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we need to. That's... At the current state of the left, I think that might be the most likely way for us to achieve any sort of victory right now. Oh, dang. Sorry, I just saw that we have a question in the chat here. What do we think about Anne Paul and how she can perform on the debate stage?
Yeah.
I'm not expecting much.
Yeah. Budrino just laughs. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I don't know if people remember, but like on like the Green leadership, she refused every single possible question. I think her answer was always like her stupid like finger thing. So I'm really looking forward to that and seeing her meltdown. I think that's going to be a beautiful thing.
She seems kind of like a fish out of water, like in the position she is now. I don't think she expected things to go the way they did, and it's kind of seems clear she has no idea what to do with the situation. Like, Green Party is basically in a full meltdown at this point.
I'm going to be optimistic. I think that if they even let the Green Party into the debates, and I think that's an if.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I think if she gets in any of the debates, like, I'm excited. I don't think she is. I think she's smart, and there's a lot that is there to criticize her about. But I think getting her in a room with like O'Toole and Trudeau, I think she could really take some of them to task. I hope, like, I would like to see that, because if she can't, then, you know, she really doesn't have any leg to stand on as to why she should be leading a party. So I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic and hope that that does happen.
That's actually a good way to look at it. If she can bring up some uncomfortable questions that NDP won't bring up.
Yeah, and she's got nothing to lose at this point. I think that you're right. Like, she is intelligent. Like, she has an established like history and a track record, and it would be so nice to see that deployed in any way that's going to kneecap the other parties. Just to have a good time. So that's a really good point. I like that. I shouldn't be so pessimistic. I'm sorry.
I agree with Bree there. Actually, I think she's going to do good in the sense that I think she, like, foreign policy is just so rarely discussed on like these kind of debates. So I find like that's the area she's weaker in. But especially when it comes to domestic policy and different things like that, I think she could really have one of those moments. I know most of the people watching this might not be old enough to remember the Brian Mulroney "you had an option, sir" moment, but that was really huge in the 80s when he told John Turner that he had an option. And it was like all over the newspapers and stuff. So I feel like Annamie Paul could hypothetically, in the right scenario, what if she calls out Justin Trudeau for blackface on stage? That could be huge. I think that could really change. Now, the Green Party's in so much trouble right now. You know, I don't know how much that would change things electorally, but I definitely think she has nothing to lose because her party is struggling right now. They're kind of at the bottom of where they are. The only place to go is up. So I don't know if she's going to be substantive in terms of like policy more than the leadership debates, because I think in these debates, she can just repeat Green Party policy and that will be more acceptable because she's the leader of the Green Party. Whereas in those debates, every person kind of had their own platform and she was just she just stuck to the party platform. But I don't think that will hurt her as much in this one. So I definitely think there is a possibility that she could find a way to have a really big viral moment with the right context.
I also think, the debates will really be the only opportunity that she has to boost her numbers. I mean, the party's broke. I don't think there's going to be a ton of local support for candidates because of all of the controversy. The only way that, if she or someone on her team, I think, definitely realizes that the only way to boost her ratings nationally is through the debates. And if I was a Green Party strategist, I would be throwing everything I had at like the first English language debate, because that is the only option for them right now.
Yeah, that's such a good point, especially with the trash media we have in this country. I don't know how they're going to reach people. I think the debate is like the key one, and I don't know what other venues they really have. Like, I think, like we talked about before, that we're going to see a lot of really cringe TikToks come up really soon. I don't know if there's like, are we going to be seeing more Twitch, more Among Us? Like, what are they going to do to be heard? Because A, I think it could be interesting just to watch those platforms, but B, maybe we can get there first and mess with them when they get there.
Yeah, it's a good question because it looks like NDP is very much going after young people and trying to meet them on the platforms young people use, TikTok being an obvious one. Greens are kind of interested in that because I don't feel like they have that same, they're not trying to be hip, they're trying to be sort of kind of, mature, quote unquote. And I'm not sure, right, like what the audience for that is. Like, because are they trying to go after liberal voters? Are they trying to go after conservative voters? Like, who is the base they're trying? Because, right, like they basically, because they're so small, they need to be poaching basically voters from other parties. So which party are they trying to compete with is the question. and to contrast themselves against.
Yeah, I think the NEP did such a good job. Because they're so intermingled with interconnected with Broadband Institute, and Broadband just released that big study talking about a wealth tax, and it just really nails home the point that 9 out of 10 Canadians support it. It also talked about like austerity, and like I think it was like 70% of people acknowledge that would be harmful to society. It's not just something they're not interested in, but they acknowledge it as a harm. So I like how they've kind of used their proxies to go out and get this footwork done before the election call, because it's going to give us so much content to kind of dig into and boost NDP policy. I don't know if there's any other kind of like creative third party. Like I'm sure the Liberals are going to have Rosemary Barton get as much Trudeau press as possible, and like the standard Liberal talking heads. Like who are the Conservatives like third parties other than just paid advertising?
I still like Facebook for Conservatives, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I feel like. Oh, go ahead.
Well, the funny thing though is you have, the PPC and kind of the anti-vax, anti-mask crowd now, who are, I think, increasingly leaving the Conservative Party for something even more right-wing. Like today, the PPC called the Conservative Party leftist. Yeah. Like, it's getting really ridiculous. So I'm not even sure if Facebook anymore, because if I was some old lady that used to vote Conservative and suddenly all of my memes are like, O'Toole wants to forcibly vaccinate you, like I wouldn't vote or donate.
Yeah, that's
so that's point. You bring up like a really interesting point too, that Conservatives is kind of like a mix now of this like very extreme right wing, sort of kind of Trumpian US conservative style, and more sort of closer to our liberals that are just more of a socially conservative views. I think like most of the older people are likely in that camp, which is like the big voting bloc. But then this other big voting bloc is just crazy people who live in their own little world, right? And there is like a lot of friction between them now. So I feel that if Conservatives do poorly this time, the party could actually fall apart. They could go back to before Harper days. I know, like, what do you all think?
I do think. Sorry, you can go.
No, go ahead.
I do think, and I don't really have set evidence to base this off, but I believe that Scheer and O'Toole were never really expected to win or have any kind of real electoral support. And in fact, I think that after O'Toole is done, probably the Conservative establishment is going to put forward someone more serious who will be able to appeal to a lot more folks. Because when you think about the last two leadership races, it was a clown show. Like, I don't think there were really any real serious candidates for the leadership either time. So it's only a matter of time. There are some very smart people in that party, and they know what they're doing, I think, and I don't know what their end game is, but it's only a matter of time before they put forward someone that is actually going to be able to appeal to Canadian voters. They're probably just waiting for the Trudeau threat to kind of subside.
Yeah, exactly. Like I thought McKay was a contender, then I saw him decide to go into the most recent leadership campaign. And I'm like, hey, maybe he's just brain dead. Like, why would he go in now? That is a really good point. And now I'm scared of like who is waiting in the wings, like Rempel, Pierre. I'd actually kind of like to see Pierre just because of the content he'd produce while the world burns. Yeah, that's a good point. Jesus.
Leslyn Lewis again. I can see her running again.
100%.
I think it's going to be interesting though, right? Because of climate change. Like every year we're going to start seeing, more fires, more droughts, right? Like heat waves. And it's just becoming undeniable. And the fact that Conservatives are still like, no, human-caused climate change isn't happening. I feel like that alone is probably going to really diminish their chances going forward. And right, like we're kind of like at this junction in history where the whole notion of conservatism doesn't make sense. Conservatism means, keeping things the way they are. That's what it means to be conservative. No radical change. Don't rock the boat. But we're at the point where we do need radical change. And I think the whole notion of the party, the whole premise of the party seems kind of outdated right now and like wrong for the moment in time and the moment in history.
Yeah, I want to ask Budrino about this because he does so much like research and tracks all these groups. But I want to just quit. Like, I think Rempel is gearing herself up so well on that front. I see her pivoting on like indigenous issues and trying to be like using the words of an ally. She's like become a full lib in that sense. And I think that she's done the best in pivoting. And then I think almost the NDP might be doing. I think they've done a really good job with the policy. I think the book. We have a question here about will the NDP even follow their policy book? But I think their policies have actually been really good from the brief stuff I've looked at. So I've been really impressed with their kind of like back game. But like on the front game, I don't think they've really kind of done a good job of hitting the poor people. And like Bree was talking about like the old people and looking at their memes, like I don't think they're hitting people where they are yet. And that sucks because they don't have like the financial capacity to hire the strategists to put those policies in place. But I just think that it is such an important question. I think we see the Conservatives getting there in some sense, but it is individuals, and it feels almost like they're angling for their own individual gain after Trudeau is gone, so they're ready to say the right thing to win, but they're not really playing this election as a team right now. And sorry, Budrino, I'll shut up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially with Michelle Rempel, with just some of the policy stuff she's made recently and the way she's spoken nicely to certain like more left-wing people on Twitter and putting her pronouns in her bio. I mean, that was unheard of. Like Trudeau doesn't even have his pronouns on his Twitter bio. So I definitely see what you mean there about the different. Everyone kind of just is waiting for that Aaron O'Toole leadership to implode, and afterwards there's a bunch of people who just want the best chance they can get. And I see what you mean about people not getting reached in a sense. Like when I go on conservative Facebook and I look at the comments, a lot of those people are hurting. A lot of those people are struggling financially. They're struggling health-wise. And in some weird ways, when you talked about the wealth tax and things like that, a lot of those people will support stuff like that, even on the conservative Facebook groups. Now, they're not going to respect trans people. They're not going to respect people who are gay or, different groups like that. But in that sense, those policies, if it was presented in the right way, I think they would agree with that, because a lot of these poor conservatives, they don't like billionaires. They don't like their boss most of the time. Their boss treats them like crap. They don't like the rich guy who owns the company necessarily get all the steps to how a real better society would be. They just think, oh, well, if I wasn't getting taxed so much at the end of my paycheck, and maybe if inflation wasn't so bad or whatever, I could get ahead.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because like I completely agree with what you're saying, that conservatives in a sense have a better understanding of what's going on than liberals, because they made that step where they understand that the government isn't working in their interests. But then because they don't have a class-based analysis, they basically go, oh, well, if you just got rid of the government, it would be fine. And then right, you get into this like libertarian nonsense, basically. But at least they understand that the system is not working in their interests. And this is the part that I think liberals don't get. And a lot of times the system is working in liberals' interest, because it is kind of like middle class, well-off, right, like salaried employees, professionals, who don't really see the problem with what's going on. They can't really relate to poor people, and they kind of see themselves that maybe one day they're going to be rich. Mm-hmm. So I think, like, I guess what we're saying is that conservatives may reinvent themselves to be socially conservative, but start pushing more kind of liberal style agenda in terms of economics policy. Mm-hmm.
Like I know you're seeking the nomination, Bree, and I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but if you were to take over the NDP federally, what are you doing to win this election? Because it seems like they're in a pivotal spot where they could either just succeed amazingly or just fail spectacularly, and I really don't know where to put my money.
I mean, I wouldn't take over the NDP federally.
I already like that answer. Yeah.
But I am not sure what the party can really do right now to get itself into like first position. I think if that happens to the NDP anytime in the immediate future, it will probably be a fluke. that being said, I kind of think if the NDP had a leader that was just like willing to go the extra mile, and I like Jagmeet, like don't get me wrong, I really do, but I think if the leader were to show like just that they were absolutely fearless, and that they were willing to advocate for things that might be unpopular, but they were willing to advocate for them several times over the course of multiple elections. And I know that doesn't really apply to this election because we only have like 30, 36, 37 more days, and really go, very far to the left, like as far as they could, while still kind of operating in the Canadian like system. Then I think eventually, folks will listen. I mean, look at Bernie, right? And yes, Bernie didn't win, and that's something to keep in mind. But Bernie had more clout and more of a reach than the NDP will have for a long time, very likely. So that's actually the answer. I was kind of dancing around some stuff there, but my basic final answer is that I just wouldn't take over the party right now.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to the folks in Ottawa that are probably having a big headache right now.
I like that answer, and I'm just going to quickly say it looks like Chad agrees with you. We have a saying here: "Want to become famous? Buy followers, primes, and viewers on bigfollows.com." So I love that spam. We should actually send that to the NDP. That might actually work. And then we have Waffle LaShawn here saying, "So true, Brie. It's about world building and doing the education on why their solutions are best over long periods." And I think just to kind of what I love about the conservative media from like Pierre is he goes out on the street, wears his like denim and whatever, and he like goes out and stands in front of like gas prices and gas pump. I want to see like cool, good-looking, handsome, beautiful Jagmeet Singh go to the grocery store and pick up like some bread from Superstore and be like, those motherfuckers, they stole money from you, they price fixed you. The price of bread should not be as high as it is now. And then talk to people in the aisles. Go to a conservative route. No, don't go to a conservative rally. Talk to conservatives and just like ask them questions. Like there's like this old show that boomers might remember. It was like Rick Mercer talking to Americans, and he would go and just ask Americans the silliest questions, and it was hilarious watching it. I want to see Jagmeet Singh with his charm go out and talk to people on the street and talk about why NDP policy benefits them. The problem is he's always so rehearsed, even in interviews. It's so bad. He can't even wing it with like in a safe environment. So I don't know if we'll ever see that, but that's what I would love to see, is talking to the people about the things that directly impact their lives in the specific spaces that impact them, because I think the conservatives do that so well. I don't know, budrino, you also seem to be a master. Oh, sorry, Dmitri, go ahead. I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, I think that's like an excellent point. And I want to reiterate like what Bree said. I think like I really agree that right now all our parties are kind of doing focus group based politics. And there is no real ideology. There is no real long-term vision from any party. It's just, what do we think is going to win us the next election? And, we'll poll people and we'll tailor a message to the next election, but there's no kind of like bigger picture. And I think we need that. If a party had a bigger picture and didn't even win like every single election, but they were saying, look, here's where we want to see Canada, like in 10 years or 20 years. Here's how we want to get there. If you vote for us, here are the policies we're going to do, right? Like, so it's kind of like difference between kind of, tactics and strategy. Like no party has strategy. They all just have tactics, and it's just kind of kids playing soccer. The ball is here, the ball is here, the ball is here, and they all just chase that. Nobody, like, we need somebody thinking about bigger picture.
And on the bigger picture, like, I know we just had like a bit of a chat about how it's very irresponsible that we're having this election right now. But honestly, I think that the left kind of needs to ditch that messaging, at least at like a party electoral level, because the NDP can spend all day saying, it's not me, I'm innocent, I'm not doing this, I'm not the one doing this. And people can agree with them, but that's not a message that's going to resonate to voters when they mark their ballots. Instead, we should be taking all the time that we're spending talking about how irresponsible and unnecessary the election is and funnel that into, whoever, if there's a majority government coming out of this, whoever runs that government will decide what Canada's COVID recovery looks like, and if that is going to be neoliberal austerity or if we're going to step into a post-neoliberal world. I mean, and we, of course, breaking it down into layman's terms, like, with the bread, like bread shouldn't cost that much. Your medicine shouldn't cost this much. Your public transit shouldn't cost this much. You shouldn't be sitting in gridlock all day. Your rent shouldn't cost that much. And if it does, like, we're going to give you immediate relief to help you with that, right? Someone said yesterday, like, the NDP needs to be focused less on winning and more on change.
Yeah.
And, playing these strategic games is not serving anyone. It's not even going to serve the NDP.
And I think also, like what you said too, is that a lot of time we see this criticism of NDP that, but they don't have a vote, they don't have a record of being in power because, like it's a risk. But I think that can be turned around easily to say, look, liberals and conservatives do have a record, and it's not a good record. How many times have liberals promised pharmacare? How many times, like last time they promised the electoral reform, they haven't done that, right? Like how many broken promises these parties have? That's their record. So should we take a party that doesn't have a record versus a party that has a terrible record? That should be the question. It shouldn't be like, NDP has no experience. Well, maybe that's a good thing if the experience that you have is terrible.
Yeah, I love the idea of putting in that effort to communicate a long-term change, and I think that's part of the problem. Like, we just had the NDP convention this year, and I think we saw how anti-democratic it was, and that could have been a venue where it was more democratic than ever. And if we really cared about building long-term permanent change, that would have been fully democratic, and that would have been, let's build a 5-year plan that we will pitch regardless of who the next leader is, because they're there to deliver what's been determined democratically by our members. And I think maybe it's just a fundamental flaw within the the NDP party, same thing, that we can't make it act with those democratic interests in mind because they're so divorced from the class analysis. But then this is me getting all communist, and I'll shut up. Sorry, Budrino, did you have a take on this?
I agree with all you. I definitely think too, when you're talking about how the NDP can build a longer movement and things like that, I think the way I see it now is stop the Liberals from getting power again, stop them from getting a majority, because if they do, it's going to be another 4 or 5 years. I'll be in my 30s. I don't want that happening. And then they gain chances are, if the Liberals they get a minority, the NDP will gain 10 to 12 seats, maybe more. That's a good step to get some more MPs, get some more funding, do some more fundraising. And then when the next election happens, hypothetically here, that's, I think, the time to really go for opposition, go for even further, where you'd have a more realistic chance. Because if the Conservatives some of these polls are just all over the place. So I've seen the Conservatives poll at like 25%. I think that's unlikely, but if that does happen, that's the end of the party. I mean, that's where like the Reform Party was polling at one point, when they were literally split, the Progressive Conservatives and the Reform Party. So in that sense, if the Conservatives want to divide themselves and they implode, that gives the NDP a really good shot to, in the future, in the long run, build a long movement that starts now and keep working towards getting to that point where Trudeau has an expiry date. Every politician is like bread. They expire and they get moldy at some point. People don't want them anymore. Yeah. And that's going to happen to Trudeau at one point. He's already lost so much favorability. He's barely hanging on now. The pandemic is the only thing that saved him. Before the pandemic, Andrew Scheer was beating him in the polls. Andrew Scheer won more votes than Trudeau did in 2019. So Trudeau's popularity is really falling off. So I really think that 5-year plan, it starts off, hold the Liberals to a minority, and then go the next election, go big, go for where you actually have a really good shot, where if the Conservatives are collapsing, and the PPC might, actually get a little bit more relevance and really kind of act like the Reform Party, I could really see the NDP have a realistic shot at opposition, or even in a better case, if Trudeau has another 50 scandals, they could have a shot at governing.
Yeah, like, I guess, like, just kind of on the topic of scandals and things that could potentially shake the election, one of the questions we have here is, what are opportunities to influence the election? Is it climate? Is it the vaccine mandates? Like, where do you see the points of entry for people who want to get involved?
I'd say climate 100%. Because the pandemic, people are getting tired of it for one. Two, I think right, eventually it will blow over, maybe like in a year or two. But climate is only going to get worse. And really, right, it's hard to overstate just how bad the situation is.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things too that we often hear, oh, well, Canada overall doesn't contribute that much from our emissions. And that's true, but we also sell our oil to other countries where it gets burned. And
Can I ask, I'm stupid on this, and I want to ask because I keep seeing this pop up. So my understanding is that we don't sell oil itself. We sell raw bitumen that needs to then be processed and turned by other parties who then go and sell it back to us and then other parties further. So we're not even cool enough to sell oil. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
I think that definitely does happen too.
Okay.
But I do think we export to US a non-trivial amount that gets used up in the US. That was kind of the last pipeline that got canceled. That now Biden is going to get oil from Saudi Arabia because obviously it's better to ship from there.
Of course, yeah.
Right? It's just the absurdity of it too. Where, we're going to cancel a pipeline. Everybody get excited because yay, it's going to be better for the climate. And it's no, we're actually just going to ship it from this horrible place over the ocean instead.
Yeah.
But I think we can't be funding this industry anymore. We literally subsidize it. We take tax dollars and put it into a fossil fuel industry instead of green energy, nuclear, whatever. That has to stop today.
Yeah.
And you all saw, for example, where liberals were just yeah, guys, we got to build a pipeline so that we can pay for climate change. That pipeline is going to cost you $15 billion that you just invest right now into dealing with climate change, and it's going to take decades to recoup that money back. It's that's gaslighting. You're just you're insulting people's intelligence, and unfortunately, a lot of people probably don't even realize how this works. But it's just such an absurd argument when IPCC comes out literally days after they come out and say, look, we have to stop all oil production in 4 years. And liberals hey, we got this 15-year plan and we're going to spend billions of dollars on oil. It's what is wrong with you people?
Can I be honest though, I kind of think what worries me about climate in regards to the election is I think it's still a little too abstract for a lot of people. I mean, it's not even that in Canada we're really dealing with climate change denialists, although of course you have a lot of those and in varying from province to province. But I think we're more dealing with the fact that it's hard to explain how the Liberals aren't doing enough and how any other party would do things differently. Because the Liberals, they appropriate all kinds of language. They won't stop saying they're taking bold action on climate change. And most people aren't going to do their homework and check if that's true or not. And when you get into numbers and statistics about outputs and emissions, that's when people, I think, start to tune out. The only real concrete thing I can think of is the fact that they bought a pipeline. But even so, there are NDP governments, in the past 2 years across the country that have also been building pipelines. So I'm not even sure that climate is the big entry point that people think it is. Because I think the numbers and the emissions, even if people care about climate change, it's still going to be hard to calculate the damage that a particular party might do.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm speaking from BC, where our government does those things you just said. Thank you for dragging me through that, Brie. We have that shitty situation in place. We've doubled the subsidies we give to fossil fuels. We right now are going through a heat wave. It's 37 degrees, and I had to close all the windows in my house, and I'm dying right now because the smoke is so bad from the wildfires. I would be coughing nonstop. And still,
so the background is real.
Sorry? The background?
The
yeah,
background
this is my backyard, yo. This is where my kid used to play. But yeah, so John Horgan, he's still the most favored the premier. Like, everybody still loves him, and he is directly responsible. Not directly responsible, but he's not doing anything to resolve this. And I think that that's a good point, Brie. Like, I don't know if that is something that's going to be triggering to people and involve people to want to make a difference. And we've seen this stuff kind of coming down the pipeline, and people don't seem to resonate or care about the numbers. Fuck. Because, yeah, I was with you, Dmitri, but then Brie made that point, and I'm like, shit, I don't know. Budrino, can you save me? Do you have any optimism? What should we be doing?
I think I would kind of see it different than, because I know Snow, I think, mentioned vaccines, and then we're all talking about climate. I almost see the way to kind of get into this more so being like cost of living, more so being economic in that sense. That's what I kind of see being that way to influence the election, I guess. Like, I think I agree with what you and Brie are saying in the sense that about climate, that like I think in a few more years it's going to become more and more and more relevant. But I think right now, in terms of like the average Canadian, just a lot of people, what you said with Horgan, with whereas I saw his approval ratings and stuff, I think that the place where people are hurting the most right now is financially, is just wanting to get the pandemic over with. And I think that's kind of the way to go in terms of like, it doesn't have to be just, because I know we've seen the polls from each party about what they care about the most. And there's, the economy, COVID, freedom, or whatever for the Conservatives, and like racial justice and a bunch of different things. But I think you can tie a lot of these issues into the primary thing to focus on would be economic, like the rising cost of living and just all the problems that come from the pandemic, how that ties into climate change. I think that all kind of ties into the way that people feel that. Because I think a lot of people care about the climate to some degree, but it's just one of those things where we see, there's people dying in the hospital of COVID and they still don't think it's real. And so because of the way humans are socially, I think we're so prone to just denying science in so many kinds of ways and just doing what we want to feel best and just ignoring problems, that I think we have to hit where it's the most noticeable. And I think that's how much the price of bread and how much the increase in rent and stuff like that is. I think all these kind of tie into it. But I think climate itself, I just think people are selfish. I think that's how we got ourselves into this mess, in the sense of like, there's obviously like corporations and stuff like that are the root cause of climate change and things like that. But I think in terms of climate, people, it's just a really hard thing to swallow. I think people want to watch horror movies and things like that, but the real horror is climate change. The real horror is the pandemic. But so many of us just want to not think about that and think about that lifestyle. We want the better lifestyle to get there.
So I wonder, actually, like, speaking of that, like, you could really tie in pandemic, climate change, and economics by saying, like, what are we going to expect with climate change? Is that, goods are going to get more expensive, right? Like, it's going to get harder to ship things. There's going to be global unrest potentially going forward. So what should Canada be doing? Well, probably becoming self-sufficient. How do we do that? By creating, crown corporations, like securing our food production, making sure we can manufacture things like vaccines, right? Or like pharmacare. So, and all that creates jobs. And we can say, look, private sector failed in that regard repeatedly. They outsourced a lot of our jobs, right? The reason, like, you don't have like a lot of manufacturing jobs in Canada is because they moved to cheaper places. So maybe we need to rethink this, right? Like, maybe we should have things like cooperative ownership, where workers own the factory, and then they decide where the work gets done. So they're not going to vote to move their job somewhere to India or to China, right? Like having and some things they're just not served well with a profit motive, like housing situation. That's a clear problem for a lot of people. Housing is becoming unaffordable in Canada. Why can't we have a crown corporation that builds housing, guarantees people jobs who want to have jobs in that sector, and then provides housing people can afford, and maybe government can give people like loans to get their first home that are interest free, right? Like things like that. And then like you could combine like recovering the economy, making it more just, making sure more money goes to regular people instead of being accumulated at the top and siphoned out of our economy. I think that's kind of like the thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like we hear a lot of this narrative about, job creators. And if you raise taxes or if we have regulation or whatever, they're going to leave and we're going to lose jobs. But it's nonsensical because, okay, like how does capitalism work? If there is a niche that's profitable where you can make money and somebody leaves that niche, well, somebody else is going to come in and start making money because there's money to be made. Like until you have so much regulation or tax that it like becomes negative profit, people are going to do it. So really what you're doing, you're not making job creators leave. You're making people who don't want to play within society leave. You're getting rid of parasites. You're shaking off the fleas from your country, right? And you're creating space for people who will create decent businesses. And I think really because we've seen this problem happen time and again, right? Like when we have big companies and they start acting in their own interest instead of interest of a country. Well, again, cooperative ownership solves that problem because the company is now owned by the people working there and the money gets fairly distributed amongst the workers and then gets recycled back into the economy instead of just getting moved out of our economy. Right? And I think like Bree said, like if NDP went this hard left, that's the kind of rhetoric I'd like to see because it's a very easy to explain solution to a problem everybody can relate to. And it can also, as a side effect, help us deal with stuff like climate change, which people might not care about as a primary problem, but they'll probably be happy that, hey, if we did this, we'd also address this while we all benefit at the same time, instead of us making a sacrifice to do it. So frame it in that way.
Yeah, I like that. I'm wondering, Bree, if you would mind sharing your thoughts on either anything that's been said so far or what you think should be done to get people to engage, to make a difference. Like Snow agreed with the housing bit. Like last thing he says here is housing would make sense to focus on. And I think that's like something that you speak passionately about, and I've enjoyed your content there, and I know that's a priority for you. And then if I could ask, so we'll ask your thoughts there, and then take as long as you want. And then after that, maybe we'll just do a round table of everybody's final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up shortly here. But yeah, what are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think housing is probably one of the most pressing things for a lot of Canadians, even folks who have housing. Oftentimes, they're only a few financial mishaps away from losing that security, right? So, and the thing about, the funniest thing about the housing crisis is that it's literally that easy to fix, as Dmitri was saying. Like, we could establish a crown corporation with the goal of building housing. That is something that we can do federally or provincially in any province. It's just something that is holistically possible and within reach. I just think it's out of reach of the imaginations of so many Canadians because we are so used to living in these like horrific neoliberal, post-apocalyptic conditions. Yeah. I mean, and I'm a little guilty of it too because I have always said like the best solution we can do is just build housing. At the same time, I'm also an advocate of for a number of market-based solutions like inclusionary zoning and co-op housing builds and things like that. Because I think we should just try to cast a wide net and try to get as much as we can. But there's really so many options, and some of them literally all we need to do is put pen to paper and it can be done. And I don't think I think if more people realize that, that's when there can actually be the political will for that sort of change.
And maybe we can also go back and look at Tommy Douglas times where we got a lot of the socialist policies passed that we still all benefit from today, that really have been just kind of eroded by consecutive liberal and conservative governments. And we can show, right, in Canada, this has been done. It worked well. It helped people. Why don't we do this again? It's not like we have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. The thing is, like, we had an actual socialist running a province. Like, I don't know if that's, like, should we go, like, I don't know if Connor's watching, and I hope not, but should we go and try to take over PEI? Like, should we pick a spot and we'll just all move there once restrictions are lifted, and we'll just take over and prove socialism works? And then Canadians, like they saw with Tommy Douglas, like, oh shit, you know what? It's nice not to have to pay so much for healthcare. And then they start to buy into it because they see a proof, our working model. Like, do we need to have a working model? Like, they don't care about the other countries. People don't seem to pay attention to that. So, like, yeah, that's a stupid question. We're not going to go move to PEI. I would love to, but yeah.
We could do it in Ontario. Maybe not soon. We could do it in Ontario. Maybe not soon.
Yeah.
But like, give us a 5-year or 10-year window, and we could do it in Ontario.
Yeah. Do we have 10 years to live? I don't know. We're the next IPC reports like, we're wrong. You've got 2 years to live. Bye, everybody. Buy an Xbox. I don't know. It's depressing. I think, unfortunately, I have to go back to my depressing life. But if we could maybe just do a round table, and I think we'll just kind of start with Budrino if you're comfortable with that, and just your thoughts of what you're going to be watching for on Sunday and the week ahead. And we'll definitely talk to you Friday at the very latest. But yeah, what are you looking at?
Sure. The biggest thing I think we're all watching is when is this election going to get called, and which day is Trudeau going to use the smallest amount of time he can to call it as early as possible. I've heard on Sunday he's going to the Governor General's house and he's going to ask. So the biggest thing I'm watching right now is what's going to happen with mail-in ballots and how difficult it's going to be, because I really do think that voter turnout is going to be one of the largest factors in whether Trudeau wins a majority or a minority. So I'm definitely tracking that. I'm going to keep bothering Elections Canada until I get a firm answer to make sure I can figure out how difficult it's going to be for the average person. And then after that, it's election season. So I think things are going to go day by day with the daily narratives of whenever the debates are, who's saying what, what are the Liberals' first big thing that they're going to say is going to be. And I'm definitely, I don't think a lot of us want an election, but at least it's, something to pay attention to for a bit.
And then are you going to be streaming on TikTok? Where can people find you if it is announced on Sunday?
Yeah, so I'll be streaming on TikTok. Whenever Trudeau asks, I'll be streaming on TikTok. My account is budrino, Budrino. And if you want to find any of my other content, you can just look up Budrino Politics on like pretty much any social media platform. I'm on all of them, basically.
Beautiful. And then we do have a comment here from Snow, Great Show All, and then from Kurt of Onyx. If we have 2 years left to live, fuck that. I stay mad and rebel. I'm with you, Kurt. DM me. I'm with you, bro. Yeah, sorry. Dmitri, what are your final thoughts? What are you watching?
Yeah, I think probably the election is locked in at this point. So I'm going to be curious how each party is going to position themselves, like what issues they think are the most relatable. And I think what's going to be interesting to see is based on what like each party sets as its platform, what demographic it basically is trying to appeal to in Canada. And right, and that'll be interesting to see like what demographics are actually like politically active right now. Like we know young people traditionally are not. Maybe this time around it will change. That's kind of like my hope. Yeah. And I stand right, like my impression is Liberals basically kind of like cater to largely kind of like upper middle class, well-off, like rich people plus kind of like well-off working class. Conservatives mix of that and just kind of like right-wing conservative. NDP seems to be more right, like gaining towards younger people. Actually, have some policy in economics that actually might help Canadians address social issues. And then Greens, yeah, I'm not really sure what they're doing right now. But I think, right, like what's going to be interesting, like once the election happens and like depends on the vote, at least like from the politically active sectors, we can kind of like see what Canadians actually care about. And it's kind of like, we kind of like, right, like had some ideas, but it's going to be interesting to get those validated. And maybe like just think about if people don't really care about the important issues like climate, right, jobs and so on, how do we make them care? How do we make those issues become more forefront than they are now? Like, why is this happening? Like, why are Liberals and Conservatives able to hijack the narrative so effectively? I think that's what we really need to figure out on the left, ultimately.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And then, Bree, what are you watching for in the week ahead?
The first thing I'm watching for is for more, like, hilarious advertisements from the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
The one we got earlier today. That is probably the most like wonderfully entertaining thing I've seen from the right in Canada since like Stephen Harper warned us about the Netflix tax in 2015.
Oh my God! Yes.
If they drop any more gems like that, like it's over. But and really, I'm looking at some really like dope progressive campaigns to kind of hit the full swing. For some of them, this is just going to be like the last like mile of the race, and some of them are going to be launching. In Etobicoke Lakeshore, we have an awesome candidate named Sasha Kane. In Oshawa, there's Shailene Camillo, and I think Kitchener Center, there's Bisan Zubi, and then Spadina Fort York is a wild card because we didn't know it was in play until like 2 days ago. But Normandy Pascal is already a recognized voice in that community, and so I'm excited to see how that campaign goes. So that's who we'll be watching for, and those are the folks that keep me in the party.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I like, for me, I'm watching Breen Ouellette. He does some really cool stuff. And then he's also been working with the Surfs TV. That's like Lance. And I really want to see how a Canadian influencer uses their power for good. I want to see what is possible. So I'll be watching that just for like tactics. And then I also want to watch, there's Alejandro Bravo in Davenport because that was a swing. And the NDP lost that by, I want to say, 2,000 votes. So I think both parties will be deploying their best tactics there. And I want to see what exactly they do so we can steal it and use it for a revolution. And then, yeah, like you said, just like watching these like stupid cringe ads that keep coming out. I want to watch Stephen Harper's dumb face open up again and say something during an election, or his stupid kid, Brock Harper. They're always saying stupid things, so I'm watching for them. Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have any final thoughts just before we peace out here? No? Okay, sweet. Thank you so much for making time, everybody. Yeah, we'll definitely do this again, at least on Friday. And good luck surviving the hellish nightmare of capitalism in the meantime. Sending you love and solidarity. Yeah, peace.
I don't think the king woke up one morning, said all the people should be better